They say the truth does not knock, it breaks the door when you least expect it. On a blazing afternoon in Johannesburg, Mandla, a tired delivery rider, stopped before a grand mansion. As the gates opened, his breath froze. There stood his wife, Naledi, draped in silk, laughing softly as she stepped out of a wealthy man's car. In that moment, a heart shattered and a storm quietly began. If you've ever trusted someone with everything, stay with us. This story may change how you see love. In every corner of Johannesburg, there are men whose sweat waters dreams they may never live to see. Mandla was one of those men. Each morning before the sun rose above the restless city, Mandla would tie his worn boots, whisper a short prayer, and mount his aging delivery bike. The engine coughed like an old storyteller, but it always obeyed him. Through crowded streets and noisy markets, past glass towers that scraped the sky, Mandla rode not for glory but for survival. Yet in his heart, he carried something greater than hunger or exhaustion. He carried love. Naledi had not always looked at him the way she did now. There was a time when she laughed easily in their small one-room home, when the flickering candlelight danced in her eyes like stars. Back then she would hold his hands and say, "Mandla, one day we will have more. But even if we don't, I have you." But time, as the elders say, tests the strength of every promise. The room they shared had begun to feel smaller, not because its walls had moved, but because Naledi's dreams had grown too large to fit inside it. Each day, as she walked through the city, she saw women stepping out of sleek cars, their heels clicking like music on polished floors. She saw gold bracelets, designer dresses, and lives untouched by struggle, and slowly something inside her began to change. One evening, Mandla returned home later than usual, his shirt damp with sweat, his shoulders heavy with fatigue. He placed a small bag on the table. "I brought your favorite," he said gently, "fried plantain from the market." Naledi glanced at the bag, then at him. Her expression did not soften. "Is that all you think I deserve?" she asked quietly. Mandla blinked, confused. "Naledi, it's what I could afford today. Tomorrow," she cut in, her voice sharper now. "Mandla, we have been living on tomorrow for years." The words struck him like a sudden storm. He stepped closer, his voice low, pleading. "I am trying. Every day I try for us." But Naledi turned away, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "Trying is not enough," she said. "Look around you. Other men are not just trying, they are succeeding." Mandla followed her gaze, though there was nothing in the room but worn furniture and quiet disappointment. That night, silence filled the space between them, heavy and suffocating. And in that silence, something unseen began to grow. Days later, as Naledi walked through an upscale shopping center, drawn not by purpose, but by longing, she caught the attention of a man who seemed to belong to a different world entirely. Mr. Dlamini. He stood tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his presence commanding without effort. His eyes lingered on Naledi not with curiosity, but with calculation. "Excuse me," he said smoothly, stepping into her path. "You look like someone who does not belong among shadows." Naledi hesitated, her heart quickening. "And where do I belong?" she asked, almost whispering. Dlamini smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Somewhere brighter," he replied. "Somewhere better." In that moment, a seed was planted. And as the elders often warn, it is not the storm that destroys a home, but the small crack that is ignored. They say temptation does not shout, it whispers, softly promising comfort while hiding its cost. After that day at the shopping center, Naledi found her thoughts returning to Mr. Dlamini more often than she cared to admit. His words echoed in her mind like a distant drumbeat. Somewhere brighter. Somewhere better. At first, she told herself it was nothing, just a passing encounter. But life has a way of pulling us toward the very things we pretend to ignore. A few days later, as Naledi walked past the same shopping center, she slowed her steps without meaning to. Her eyes wandered searching. And there he was, Mr. Dlamini stood near the entrance, speaking into his phone, his voice calm and controlled. When he noticed her, he ended the call without hesitation. "I was hoping I would see you again," he said, as if it had already been decided by fate. Naledi felt a strange warmth rise in her chest. "Is that so?" she replied, trying to sound indifferent. Dlamini nodded, his gaze steady. "A woman like you should not walk alone in a place like this. Allow me to offer you some company." She hesitated, but only for a moment. They walked together, their conversation flowing more easily than Naledi expected. Dlamini spoke of business, of travel, of opportunities that stretched far beyond the dusty roads Mandla traveled each day. His world sounded like a story, one filled with luxury, power, and endless possibility. "You deserve more than struggle," he told her, as they paused outside a boutique. "I can see it in the way you carry yourself. You are meant for a better life." Naledi looked at her reflection in the glass, simple clothes, worn sandals, tired eyes. And for the first time, she did not see herself as Mandla's loving wife. She saw what she could become. "I don't belong in places like this," she murmured. Dlamini stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Not yet," he said, "but you could." That word "could" was powerful. It did not force her. It invited her. And Naledi, already restless with dissatisfaction, began to lean toward it. In the days that followed, Dlamini's presence in her life grew like a quiet shadow. At first, it was just brief meetings, coffee conversations, laughter that felt lighter than anything she had known in months. Then came the gifts: a bracelet, a dress, a pair of shoes that fit her perfectly, as if they had been waiting for her all along. Each gift came with no demand, no pressure, only a smile and a simple phrase: "You deserve it." At night, when Mandla returned home, tired and unaware, Naledi would hide these things carefully. But guilt has a voice of its own, and sometimes it spoke louder than she wished. One evening, as Mandla sat beside her sharing stories of his long day, she found herself watching him differently. His hands rough from work, his voice gentle but weary, his dreams small, careful, humble. "Mandla," she said suddenly. He looked at her, his eyes soft. "Yes." "Do you ever wish for more?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Of course, but I am grateful for what we have." Naledi's expression hardened just slightly. "That is the difference between us," she said quietly. Mandla frowned, not fully understanding, but Naledi did. Inside her, a battle was taking place. One side whispered of loyalty, of love, of the man who had stood beside her through every hardship. The other whispered of comfort, of beauty, of a life where she would never have to struggle again. And slowly, almost without noticing, Naledi began to listen more closely to the second voice. Days turned into weeks. The meetings with Dlamini became more frequent, more intimate, and with each step she took toward him, she took one step further away from Mandla. For betrayal, as the elders say, is not born in a single moment. It is built choice by choice. They say when the heart begins to wander, even the smallest home can feel like a prison. Naledi no longer returned home with the same softness in her step. Where there had once been warmth, there was now distance, cold, and quiet like harmattan winds that slip through cracks unseen. Mandla noticed. How could he not? A man who loves deeply can hear the silence between words. One evening he sat outside their small house waiting. The sky had already swallowed the sun, and the streets buzzed with the tired rhythm of people returning from long days. Still, Naledi had not come home. When she finally arrived, her scent carried something unfamiliar, perfume too expensive for their world. "Where have you been?" Mandla asked, gently standing up. Naledi did not meet his eyes as she walked past him. "Out," she replied shortly, with who he pressed, though his voice trembled with hesitation. She stopped, turned slowly, and looked at him not with guilt but with irritation. "Must I report my every movement to you now?" she snapped. Mandla took a step back as if struck. "No, I just worry," he said softly. This is not like you. Naledi let out a dry laugh. Maybe you never really knew me. Those words lingered in the air long after she had gone inside. That night, Mandla lay awake staring at the ceiling as questions circled his mind like restless birds. He wanted to believe in her, to trust the woman he had built his life around, but something inside him had begun to fracture. The next morning, he woke before dawn just as he always did. But this time the weight on his chest was heavier than his worn delivery bag. Still he pushed forward. For love, for hope, for the belief that things could still be repaired. Days passed and Mandla began to work even harder. He accepted extra deliveries, rode longer distances, and returned home later each night. His body ached, but he ignored it. If I can give her more, he thought maybe she will smile again. But Naledi did not notice. Or perhaps, she chose not to. Her world had begun to shift entirely. Now, she spent more time with Dlamini than at home. He took her to places Mandla could not even imagine, restaurants, where the lights glowed like gold rooms, where silence itself felt expensive cars that moved as smoothly as whispered promises. One evening, as they sat together overlooking the city skyline, Dlamini handed her a glass of wine. "You are different when you are here," he said. Naledi smiled faintly. "Different how?" Lighter, he replied. "Like you are finally becoming who you were meant to be." She looked out over the city, its lights flickering like distant stars. For a moment, she forgot everything else. Forgot Mandla, forgot the small home, forgot the promises she had once made. But even as she leaned into this new life, whispers began to spread through the community she had left behind. Neighbors noticed her absence. They spoke in hushed tones as Mandla passed by. "That woman, she no longer belongs to that man. I saw her in a big car the other day. Poor Mandla, he walks like a donkey yet. Words once spoken cannot be taken back." And though Mandla tried to ignore them, they found their way into his ears, planting seeds of doubt he could no longer silence. One afternoon, as he rested briefly by the roadside, an older woman approached him. Gogo, Thandi, her eyes wise and weathered by years, studied him carefully. "My son," she said softly, sitting beside him, "a man who carries too much pain in silence, will one day break without warning." Mandla forced a weak smile. "I am fine, Gogo." She shook her head slowly. "No, you are not. And the truth you are avoiding, it is already walking toward you." Mandla looked away, his jaw tightening. "I trust my wife," he said firmly, though his voice lacked conviction. Gogo Thandi sighed. "Trust is a beautiful thing," she murmured. "But even the strongest rope will snap if it is pulled from both ends." As she stood to leave, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Prepare your heart, Mandla," she said, "for not all storms announce themselves with thunder." And as he watched her walk away, a strange unease settled deep within him. Because somewhere in his soul, he knew something was coming. They say the day truth reveals itself, even the strongest man must choose between breaking or becoming something new. The sun stood high and unforgiving over Johannesburg when Mandla received the delivery that would change everything. It was just another package. A neatly wrapped parcel, stamped with urgency, addressed to a name he had seen before, but never thought much about: Mr. Dlamini. Mandla wiped the sweat from his brow and adjusted the strap on his shoulder. His body ached from hours of riding, but he pushed forward as always. Work did not wait for pain. As he approached the gates of Dlamini's mansion, he slowed. The place stood like a kingdom: tall walls, polished gates, silence that spoke of power. It was the kind of place Mandla had only seen from a distance, never this close. He pressed the bell. A guard opened, barely sparing him a glance before allowing him in. "Delivery," Mandla said quietly. He stepped inside his boots, feeling out of place on the smooth stone path. The air itself felt different, cleaner, colder, as if struggle had never touched this ground. Then he heard it. Laughter. Soft, Familiar. His heart skipped. No, it couldn't be. But the closer he walked, the louder it became. And then he saw her, Naledi. She stood near the entrance of the grand house, dressed in a flowing silk gown Mandla had never seen before. Her hair was styled elegantly, her posture confident, her smile radiant. But it was not meant for him. Beside her stood Mr. Dlamini, his hand resting lightly on her back, as if she belonged there. As if she belonged to him. Time slowed. Mandla's fingers tightened around the package until the edges bent beneath his grip. Naledi turned. Their eyes met, and in that moment, everything Mandla had feared became real. Her smile faded not into guilt, but into something colder, something distant. Mandla, she said almost as if his name was unfamiliar on her tongue. He swallowed hard, his voice barely steady. Naledi, what is this? Silence lingered between them, thick and suffocating. Then Naledi straightened. What does it look like? She replied. The words cut deeper than any blade. Mandla stepped closer, his eyes searching her face, desperate for a sign, any sign that the woman he loved was still there. You didn't even tell me, he said. I heard things, but I didn't believe them. I trusted you. Naledi looked away for a brief second, then back at him, her expression now firm. I didn't tell you because you would never understand, she said. This life, this is what I deserve. Mandla's chest tightened. And what about us? He asked, his voice breaking. What about everything we built together? Naledi shook her head slowly. We built nothing, Mandla, she said. We survived. There is a difference. Each word felt like a hammer striking his heart. Before he could respond, Dlamini stepped forward, his presence calm but commanding. You've done your job, he said, his tone polite but dismissive. You can leave the package and go. Mandla didn't move. His eyes remained locked on Naledi. You're choosing this, he whispered. Over me, Naledi held his gaze, and then without hesitation she nodded. Yes, the world seemed to collapse in that single word. Mandla lowered his eyes, the strength in his body draining away. Slowly he placed the package on the ground. For a moment no one spoke. Then without another word, Mandla turned and walked away. No shouting, no anger, just silence. But as he stepped out of those gates, something inside him shifted, because pain, as the elders say, can either bury a man or awaken him. Behind him, Naledi watched him leave, her expression unreadable. And beside her, Dlamini simply smiled. The storm had finally arrived, and its consequences had only just begun. They say when a man loses everything, he finally sees what truly mattered, and what never did. Mandla did not remember how he rode his bike home that day. The road blurred beneath him, the noise of the city fading into a distant hum. Cars passed, people shouted, life continued, but inside him, something had gone silent. When he reached his small house, he did not enter immediately. He stood outside, staring at the door as if it belonged to someone else. Inside those walls lived memories, laughter, promises, dreams whispered in the dark. But now, those memories felt like echoes from a life that had already ended. Slowly, he pushed the door open. The room was empty, not just of people, but of warmth. Naledi had taken her clothes, her shoes, the few things she had once called hers. Even the small framed photo of them on their wedding day was gone. Mandla walked inside and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time, he allowed himself to break. His shoulders trembled, his hands covered his face, and the tears came not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a man who had held too much inside for too long. I gave you everything, he whispered into the silence. But the silence gave nothing back. Days passed. Mandla stopped going to work. His bike remained untouched, leaning against the wall like a forgotten companion. He barely ate, barely slept. Neighbors noticed, but no one knew how to reach him. Until one morning, a familiar voice called from outside. Mandla. It was Gogo Thandi. He did not respond at first, but she entered anyway, as if she already knew she was needed. She found him sitting on the floor, his eyes hollow, his spirit dimmed. Without a word, she sat beside him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then she said softly, "When the rain destroys your home, you can sit in the mud, or you can begin to rebuild." Mandla let out a bitter laugh. "Rebuild what, Gogo? There is nothing left." Gogo Thandi turned to him, her gaze steady. "There is always something left," she said. "You." He shook his head slowly. "I was not enough." "No," she replied firmly. "You were enough for the wrong person." Those words struck something deep within him. He looked at her, his eyes searching. "You gave love," she continued. "You gave loyalty. You gave sacrifice. These are not weaknesses, Mandla. They are strengths, but only in the hands of someone who knows their value." Mandla's breathing slowed. For the first time since that day, the weight on his chest shifted just slightly. "What do I do now?" he asked quietly. Gogo Thandi smiled faintly. "You stand," she said, "and then you walk, one step at a time." That day Mandla picked up his bike again. It was not easy. Every pedal felt heavy. Every street reminded him of what he had lost. But this time, he was not riding for someone else. He was riding for himself. Days turned into weeks. Mandla returned to work, slowly rebuilding his routine. He saved what little he could. He spoke less, but when he did, there was a quiet strength in his voice that had not been there before. People began to notice. "He has changed," they said, and they were right. Meanwhile, in a world far removed from Mandla's struggle, Naledi lived in comfort, but not in peace. At first, everything felt like a dream. The mansion, the clothes, the endless luxury. But dreams, as the elders say, do not always tell the truth. Dlamini, once charming and attentive, began to reveal another side. He spoke less to her and more at her. He controlled where she went, what she wore, who she spoke to. "You represent me now," he told her one evening. "Do not forget that." Naledi forced a smile, but inside something tightened. She looked around the grand room, at the expensive furniture, the shining floors, and for the first time, she felt small, because she was no longer a woman choosing her life. She was a woman, living inside someone else's. And somewhere deep within her, a quiet regret began to grow. They say the same road that leads you to glory can also lead you back to your shame. At first, Naledi ignored the feeling, the unease, the quiet discomfort that crept into her chest when the mansion grew too silent, when Dlamini's voice no longer carried warmth but authority. She told herself, "This is the life I chose." But the truth, like a shadow at sunset, was growing longer. One evening, as the golden light of Johannesburg faded into darkness, Naledi sat alone in the vast living room. The walls, once dazzling, now felt cold, too large, too empty. Dlamini had not returned all day. When he finally did, he did not greet her. He walked past her as though she were part of the furniture. "Where were you?" Naledi asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Dlamini loosened his tie, not looking at her. Busy. With what she pressed, he stopped. Slowly he turned, his expression no longer masked by charm. "With things that matter," he replied. The words landed like a slap. Naledi stood, her heart pounding. "I am here too, Dlamini. Or have you forgotten that?" He let out a short, humorless laugh. "No," he said, "I have not forgotten. That is the problem." She frowned. "What do you mean?" Dlamini walked closer, his gaze sharp. "You were interesting when you were new," he said plainly. "But now, you are like everything else I own. Familiar." Naledi's breath caught. "I am not something you own," she said, her voice trembling. Dlamini raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you?" Silence fell. And in that silence, the illusion shattered completely. Naledi took a step back, her mind racing. "You promised me a better life. I gave you one," he replied coldly. Look around you. This is more than you ever had. But I gave up everything for this, she cried. Dlamini shrugged. That was your choice. Those words echoed louder than anything else. Your choice. Naledi felt the ground beneath her shift. For the first time, she saw clearly not the mansion, not the luxury, but the truth she had refused to face. She had not been chosen. She had only been used. Days later, the final blow came. Without warning, Dlamini informed her that she had to leave. I have made other arrangements, he said, simply handing her an envelope. Naledi stared at it, her hands shaking. You're sending me away, I am moving on, he corrected. To who, she asked bitterly. Dlamini smirked. Does it matter? Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of him. She packed her things in silence. The same things she had once believed made her powerful now felt like burdens in her hands. When she stepped out of the mansion, there was no car waiting, no driver, no comfort. Just the open road and the consequences of her choices. Meanwhile, across the city, Mandla stood in front of a small but growing delivery business he had begun building with determination and patience. It was not grand, it was not luxurious, but it was his. People greeted him with respect now. His name carried weight, not because of wealth, but because of character. One afternoon, as he finished a delivery near a busy street, he saw a familiar figure sitting on a bench. Naledi. Her clothes were simple again. Her posture no longer proud, but heavy with something deeper, regret. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither moved. Then Naledi stood slowly and walked toward him. Mandla, she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. He looked at her, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with calm distance. I lost everything, she continued, her voice breaking. I was wrong. I see it now. Mandla listened quietly. I thought wealth would make me happy, she said, but I lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. Tears fell freely now. I lost you. Silence stretched between them. Then Mandla spoke. You did not lose me, Naledi, he said gently. You chose to leave. Those words, though calm, carried a weight heavier than anger. Naledi lowered her head, unable to respond. And in that moment, she understood. Some choices cannot be undone, and some losses are permanent. They say not all losses are curses. Some are lessons dressed in pain. Naledi stood there long after Mandla had finished speaking, her heart heavy, with a truth she could no longer escape. The man before her was not the same man she had left behind. He stood taller, not in wealth, but in dignity. There was no desperation in his eyes anymore, no pleading, no fear of losing her. And somehow, that hurt her more than anything else. Mandla. Please, she whispered, her voice trembling like dry leaves in the wind. I know I cannot change what I did, but I have nowhere else to go. The street around them continued its restless rhythm, cars passing, voices rising and fading. But in that moment, it felt as though the world itself was waiting for his answer. Mandla took a slow breath. For a brief second, memories flickered across his mind. The laughter they once shared, the dreams they once built, the love he once held so tightly. But then came the other memories, the silence, the distance. The moment she chose another man, without hesitation. He looked at her not as his wife, but as a person standing at the edge of her own consequences. I wish you peace, Naledi, he said softly. Her eyes widened, searching his face for something more. But peace does not always come from returning to where you left, he continued. Sometimes it comes from learning why you left in the first place. Tears streamed down her face. So, that's it, she asked, her voice barely audible. You won't take me back, Mandla shook his head gently. Some doors, he said, once closed must remain closed, not out of hatred but out of wisdom. Naledi's shoulders dropped. In that moment, she understood something deeper than regret. She understood consequence. There would be no grand return, no second chance wrapped in comfort, only the long road of rebuilding, alone. And so, without another word, she turned and walked away. Each step carried the weight of her choices. Each breath reminded her of what she had lost, not because it was taken from her, but because she had let it go. Mandla watched her for a moment, then turned in the opposite direction. He did not feel victory. He did not feel anger. He felt free. For the first time in a long while, his heart was no longer tied to someone who could not see his worth. Days turned into months. Naledi found work in a small market far from the life she once chased. It was not easy. There were days she went hungry, nights she cried quietly under the weight of her past, but slowly she began to change. Not into the woman she once pretended to be, but into someone who finally understood the value of what she had lost. As for Mandla, his small delivery business continued to grow. People trusted him not because he was rich, but because he was honest. And in time, he found something even greater than what he had before. He found peace. For as the elders say, gold may shine in the sun, but it cannot warm a cold heart. And love once broken by greed does not always return, no matter how deeply one regrets. So remember this wherever you are watching from. Do not trade what is real for what only looks beautiful. Because not everything that glitters is gold, and not every door you close will ever open again. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so more stories like this can find those who need them most.